Chapter 1: The Basement Kingdom. I haven't seen sunlight in 147 days. Not real sunlight, anyway, the kind that warms your skin and makes normal people want to go outside and pretend they're happy. The closest I get is the pale LED strips I've installed throughout my laboratory, calibrated to mimic the solar spectrum at precisely 5,778 Kelvin. It's more efficient than the real thing, and unlike the sun, my lights don't judge me for choosing to exist 3 stories underground. I'm well aware that having the resources to replicate stellar thermodynamics in a private bunker is a level of privilege most geniuses can only dream of, and that realization, more than any solar photon, reminds me of my luck. My name is Adrian Blackwood, though I'm not sure names matter much when you're the only person in your world. I'm 18 years old, worth approximately $2.7 billion through a trust fund I'd ever asked for, and I am quite possibly the loneliest genius who has ever lived. That last part isn't self-pity. It's a statistical analysis based on available data regarding social isolation patterns among individuals with IQs exceeding immeasurable. I never chose my family's wealth, but I chose to leverage it, and acknowledging that luck helps me avoid the hubris trap. Most people don't get hand-me-down funding to rewrite the laws of physics. The basement of our family's mansion, though calling it a basement feels inadequate for a space that spans nearly 4,000 square feet, has been my entire universe since I was 14. My parents think I'm going through a phase. 4 years of refusing to leave the house, speaking to them only through the intercom system, with neural dampeners engaged to slow my processing speed enough to maintain a coherent conversation, and having all my food delivered to the laboratory entrance apparently qualifies as adolescent rebellion in their minds. They've stopped trying to coax me out. I think they're relieved. Down here, I am king of domain that exists partially in this dimension and partially in 17 others. The portal array I constructed takes up the entire east wall, a series of crystalline structures that shouldn't be able to exist according to any physics textbook, forged from materials that I've harvested from realities where matter behaves more like a suggestion than a law. The portals shimmer with an opalescent light that would probably drive a normal person insane if they stared at it for too long. I find it soothing. I've been staring at it for the past 6 hours, running calculations through quantum processors that exist partially in this reality and partially in dimensions where mathematics functions as a physical force. The accident that nearly killed me 3 years ago, a dimensional cascade failure that should have torn me apart at the molecular level, instead gave me the opportunity to rebuild myself from the ground up. Better, stronger, transcendent. I even programmed self-adjusting neural dampeners into my cognitive cortex so I can decelerate thought loops when I need to interact with humans, should I ever choose to reopen verbal channels with them. Only 12.7% of my original biological matter remains, concentrated primarily in my brainstem and a few essential neural clusters that I couldn't safely replace, and a semi-synthetic vagus nerve connected to a biological microbiome I meticulously cultivate. I tried going without, but it made me feel empty. Everything else is synthetic, constructed from specialized allotropic elements and azeotropic liquids, along with nanosynthesized alloys I infused with materials harvested across 17 different dimensional planes. Allotropic materials specially synthesized for their near-mythical properties, forged from the crystalline lattices of Dimension 7 where matter exists in a state of permanent quantum flux, replaced my skeletal system with a framework that can phase between solid and incorporeal states at will. My bones are no longer calcium phosphate. They're living geometric structures that can reconfigure their molecular density in real time, making me simultaneously lighter than air and harder than diamond. Azeotropic fluid-like substances drawn from the metallic storms of Dimension 12, where electromagnetic fields achieve consciousness, now comprise 67% of my muscular and circulatory systems. This liquid metal flows through synthetic arteries, responding to thought faster than any biological nerve impulse. My heart is now a dimensional pump that doesn't beat so much as exist, drawing energy from quantum fluctuations across multiple realities to sustain the hybrid organism I've become. My eyes are crystalline sensors capable of perceiving 14 different spectrums simultaneously. My skin is a biosynthetic membrane embedded with microscopic portal generators that allow me to interface directly with dimensional energy fields. Even my brain has been augmented. Neural mesh networks grown from consciousness conducting minerals replace the inefficient organic pathways that once limited my processing power. I am no longer human in any meaningful biological sense, which is fitting, since I stopped wanting to be human long before the accident gave me an excuse to abandon the pretense entirely. Privilege bought my isolation, but self-awareness keeps me from mistaking it for inevitability. The world above is full of people, 7 billion of them, all talking, breeding, fighting, and dying in patterns so predictable that I could write algorithms to forecast their behavior with 94.7% accuracy. They form tribes and declare wars over invisible line on maps. They worship invisible beings in the sky. They fall in love and break each other's hearts, and somehow convince themselves this chaos has meaning. I used to be one of them, before the incident at the science fair when I was 13, before the photographers and reporters and the other children who threw rocks at our car because they couldn't understand what I was, before I realized that being the smartest person in the room just makes you a target for everyone else's insecurities and failures. So I built myself a better room. Down here, I don't have to pretend to be less than I am. I don't have to watch my parents' friends look at me like I'm some sort of fascinating monster they'd like to study. I don't have to hear whispers about the Blackwood freak or endure another psychologist trying to diagnose what's wrong with me. When I do speak, the neural dampeners ensure I slow my thoughts to human conversation tempo, because even gods must lower their voice to converse with mortals. Nothing is wrong with me. I evolved past the need for their approval.
Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The child can't be more than 6 months old. I've been staring at the newsfeed for 3 hours and 17 minutes, and I can't look away from the image frozen on my screen. The infant is lying motionless in what used to be a hospital ward in Gaza, her tiny body so emaciated that her ribs cast shadows on her chest. Her eyes are open but unfocused, staring at something beyond the camera, beyond the rubble, beyond this world entirely. She looks like she's already dead, but the timestamp indicates the footage is from 6 hours ago, which means she might still be alive, right now, as I sit in my climate-controlled laboratory with my perfectly calibrated nutrition supplements and my dimensional materials worth more than most countries' GDP. I tell myself this isn't my problem. I've told myself this for months as the crisis escalated, as the death toll climbed, as the images became more horrific. Other people's wars, other people's hatred, other people's children. I didn't choose to be born into a world where humans solve their differences by murdering each other's babies. I didn't ask to have the capabilities to potentially intervene. I built my portals to explore the multiverse, not to play savior to a species that has spent its entire history perfecting new ways to cause suffering. But this child, my synthetic systems are processing the image at rates approaching consciousness speed, several exabytes per microsecond flowing through quantum processors that span multidimensional planes simultaneously. Every pixel is analyzed, cross-referenced, and permanently archived in crystalline memory matrices that exist outside normal spacetime. The data streams directly into what remains of my organic consciousness: severe acute malnutrition, probable dehydration, signs of infection around what appears to be an untreated wound on her left arm, survival probability without immediate medical intervention, 0.12%. I switch feeds, trying to escape the image, but it's everywhere. Different angles, different children, but the same hollow stare, the same countdown to death. Aid trucks turned away at checkpoints, medical supplies blocked by bureaucracy and politics, doctors operating without anesthesia because there isn't any left. My left hand begins to destabilize. The quantum resonance of the liquid metal responds to emotional spikes in ways that I thought I'd eliminated, causing reality distortions around my fingertips. Small tears in spacetime appear and vanish as the dimensional energy flowing through my hybrid nervous system surges beyond normal parameters. I haven't lost control of my synthetic body like this in over a year. I close the news feeds and pull up my portal diagnostics instead, drowning myself in the clean mathematics of dimensional physics. Energy readings, stability coefficients, quantum entanglement measurements. Numbers that make sense. Numbers that don't have faces or names or last moments of consciousness before the light goes out forever. But I can still see her. The image is burned into my memory with perfect digital clarity, cataloged and cross-referenced by systems that were designed to never forget anything. I've been telling myself for 4 years that I don't care about other people, that I evolved beyond such primitive emotional attachments, that my isolation is a choice, not a defense mechanism, that I'm better off alone in my basement kingdom where no one can hurt me and I can't disappoint anyone. But somewhere in the neural mesh that comprises 60% of my brain, in the spaces between the quantum processors and the dimensional interfaces, something purely human is screaming. The child's eyes looked exactly like mine did in the mirror the night I decided to stop leaving this room. Empty, abandoned, already gone. I haven't cried in 3 years. My synthetic optical systems don't function the same way as organic tear ducts, and I thought I'd successfully rerouted the neurochemical pathways that trigger such responses through my hybrid brain architecture. But something resembling tears is leaking from my crystalline eye sensors, and my allotropic skeleton is resonating with dimensional frequency fluctuations so severe that I have to grip the edges of my workstation to prevent reality distortions around my body. Portal Array 7 begins to activate without my conscious command, responding to subconscious signals from my neural implants. The crystalline structures hum with interdimensional energy, and I can see through to a reality where the laws of physics would allow me to be anywhere in the world instantaneously, where distance is just another variable to be manipulated, where a basement-dwelling freak with more power than wisdom could possibly save a dying child, or destroy everything in the attempt. For the first time in 4 years, I'm seriously considering leaving my laboratory, not because I've suddenly developed faith in humanity or overcome my crippling social anxiety, but because some small, stubborn part of my soul refuses to let a baby die while I have the power to prevent it. Even if saving her means I have to face the world I've spent so long trying to forget. Even if it means becoming the very thing I've been hiding from, someone who cares enough to risk everything.
Chapter 3: The Mechanism of Hope. Portal Array 7 completes its initialization sequence, and I find myself staring into a window that opens onto the ruins of Gaza City. The dimensional viewer, constructed from crystallized light harvested from Dimension 4 where photons achieve permanence, provides perfect clarity across 11,000 miles of space-time. I can see everything: the shattered remains of apartment buildings, the desperate crowds surrounding the few remaining hospitals, the precise GPS coordinates where that dying child lies. Latitude 31.5017 degrees N, longitude 34.4668 degrees E. Al-Shifa Hospital, Ward 7, bed number 23. My quantum processors have already triangulated her exact position and calculated 17 different approach vectors that would allow me to reach her in under 47 seconds. I shouldn't know these details. I shouldn't care about them. But my hybrid consciousness has been running probability cascades for the past 6 hours, modeling intervention scenarios with obsessive precision. Each calculation leads to the same conclusion: I could save her. I could save all of them. The azeotropes flowing through my synthetic nervous system pulses with agitation, responding to emotional states I thought I'd successfully suppressed. My dimensional heart, that impossible organ that draws energy from quantum fluctuations across multiple realities, begins to accelerate its resonance frequency.
Even my Altropis skeleton shifts subtly, reconfiguring molecular bonds in preparation for actions I haven't consciously decided to take. My body knows what I'm going to do before my mind accepts it. Adrian? My mother's voice echoes through the intercom system, startling me back to awareness of my immediate surroundings. I haven't heard from her in 6 days. Are you... are you all right down there? The house's electromagnetic readings are spiking off the charts. I glance at the monitoring station and realize she's right. My emotional destabilization is bleeding through the dimensional barriers I maintain around the laboratory, causing reality fluctuations that register on even conventional sensors. The mansion's basement probably reads like the epicenter of a localized earthquake to any detection equipment. I'm fine. I lie into the microphone for the first time in weeks. My voice sounds strange to my own auditory processors. Rougher than I remember, distorted by the quantum harmonics that now modulate my vocal cords. Okay, sweetheart. Let me know if you need anything. Sweetheart. She still calls me that, even though the thing speaking to her shares less genetic material with her original son than most chimpanzees. Even though I've spent 4 years treating her with the cold indifference I reserve for all biological organisms. Even though I've systematically replaced every part of myself that connected me to the family she remembers. Something in my remaining organic brain tissue responds to the word with a cascade of neurochemical reactions I'd forgotten were possible. The sensation is uncomfortable, primitive, human. I terminate the connection and return my attention to the portal array. Through the dimensional viewer, I watch medical personnel in Gaza struggling to treat patients with supplies that ran out weeks ago. A doctor is using a smartphone's flashlight to examine a patient because the hospital's generators have failed. Another is creating makeshift bandages from bed sheets because there's nothing else left. They're trying to save lives with tools that wouldn't be adequate for a veterinary clinic in the developed world. And here I sit with technology that could revolutionize medicine, could create unlimited clean energy, could solve resource scarcity for the entire planet. And I use it to maintain my isolation. The mathematical elegance of my situation becomes suddenly apparent. I am the intersection of unlimited capability and unlimited selfishness. I am what happens when godlike power meets cowardice. I have been running away from my own potential for 4 years. Portal Array 12 begins its activation sequence, then Array 15, then Array 3. My subconscious is initializing multiple dimensional gateways without consulting my higher reasoning functions, preparing for actions that terrify the remaining human parts of my psyche. I could step through those portals and be in Gaza in 17 seconds. I could create protected zones using dimensional barriers that no conventional weapon could penetrate. I could synthesize unlimited medical supplies using matter-state conversion from Dimension 9. I could establish communication networks that bypass all government censorship. I could document evidence of war crimes using recording devices that exist outside normal space-time. I could change everything. Or I could close the portals, return to my news feeds, and pretend that child's suffering isn't my responsibility. My Altropis skeleton is now vibrating at frequencies approaching dimensional transition. My synthetic skin is generating microscopic portal vortexes that appear and vanish in response to my emotional state. The laboratory's reality stability is dropping to levels that would be considered dangerous if anyone else were present. I am literally coming apart at the dimensional seams. 37 minutes, I say out loud, my voice echoing strangely in the crystalline chamber. That's how long she has left if the infection spreads to her bloodstream. My quantum processors have been running continuous biological simulations based on the visual data from the news feeds. The child, I've designated her Subject Alpha in my memory banks because giving her a name would make this even more difficult, will enter systemic septic shock in 37 minutes unless she receives immediate antibiotic treatment. 37 minutes to decide whether I remain a coward
or become something entirely different. The dimensional viewer shifts focus, scanning through the ruins until it locates the specific ward where she lies. She hasn't moved. Her chest still rises and falls with mechanical regularity, but each breath is weaker than the last. Her parents are nowhere visible in the frame, probably dead, probably buried under rubble somewhere in the city, probably another casualty statistic in a war that everyone has stopped counting. She is completely alone, just as I have been for 4 years. Just as I chose to be. No, I say with a word that creates visible ripples in the air around me, as my dimensional field generators respond to the shift in my emotional state. Portal Array 7 flares to brilliant life, opening a gateway that spans continents and renders distance meaningless. Through it, I can smell the dust and smoke and desperation of a dying city. For the first time in 4 years, I'm about to leave my basement kingdom. And I'm absolutely terrified.
Chapter 4, First Steps into Hell. I stand at the threshold of Portal Array 7 for 5 minutes and 36 seconds, my synthetic system cycling through combat scenarios and emergency protocols, while the organic remnants of my brain scream warnings about exposure, vulnerability, and the thousand ways this could end in catastrophe. The portal's event horizon shimmers 6 inches from my face, close enough that I can feel the displaced air currents from Gaza mixing with the sterile atmosphere of my laboratory. Close enough that my crystalline sensors detect trace amounts of cordite, pulverized concrete, and something else. Something organic and terrible that my quantum processors immediately identify as the chemical signature of mass death. I have never smelled a war zone before. My olfactory system was one of the first biological functions I replaced, upgrading to molecular analyzers capable of detecting individual chemical compounds at the parts per trillion level. What I'm experiencing now isn't smell in any conventional sense. It's a direct neural interface with atmospheric chemistry that provides more information than any human nose could process. The air through the portal contains 0.047% more carbon dioxide than normal atmospheric concentrations. The accumulated exhalations of crowds of people packed into inadequate shelter spaces, elevated particulate matter from building demolitions, trace pharmaceuticals from overwhelmed medical facilities, and underneath it all, the persistent molecular signature of decay. This is what it smells like when civilization collapses. My allotropic skeleton locks into high-density configuration, transforming my bones into structures harder than titanium in preparation for potential combat. As aeotrope circuits throughout my synthetic muscular system flood with dimensional energy, increasing my strength to levels that could punch through reinforced concrete. My skin's microscopic portal generators calibrate for defensive configurations that would allow me to phase shift away from incoming projectiles. I'm as prepared for violence as any being in human history, but I'm not prepared for what I see through the dimensional viewer. The hospital ward is worse than the news footage suggested. Subject Alpha, the dying infant, is not alone. She lies in a makeshift crib constructed from a cardboard box, surrounded by dozens of other children in various stages of malnutrition and disease. Some are crying with voices too weak to carry beyond their immediate vicinity. Others have progressed beyond crying to the terrible silence that precedes death. There are no adults present in the frame. No doctors. No nurses. No parents. Just children, abandoned to die while the world argues about politics and territorial boundaries and who has the right to exist. My dimensional heart, that impossible organ that sustains my hybrid existence, begins to resonate at frequencies I've never experienced before. The sensation is simultaneously mechanical and organic, as if the quantum fluctuations that power my transformed physiology are responding to something beyond pure logic. I think this might be what humans call rage. 31 minutes, I announced to the empty laboratory. Subject Alpha's biological countdown continues with mathematical precision, each second bringing her closer to systemic organ failure. My processors have already designed 17 different treatment protocols that could save her life, but they all require the same first step. I have to walk through the portal. I have to leave my sanctuary and enter a world where people will see me, judge me, fear me, and possibly try to kill me. I have to risk exposure to biological pathogens, emotional trauma, and the chaos of human suffering on a scale I can barely comprehend. I have to become visible again. My crystalline optical sensors analyze my reflection in the portal's event horizon, and what I see is no longer recognizably human. My face is angular planes of synthetic flesh over an allotropic skull structure that could deflect small arms fire. My eyes are multispectral sensors that glow with a faint bioluminescence generated by quantum processors working at maximum capacity. My skin has the subtle iridescent quality that comes from microscopic dimensional interfaces, creating patterns that shift and flow like living circuitry. I look like exactly what I am, a creature that rebuilt itself using materials and principles that don't exist in conventional reality, a walking violation of physics, a monster wearing the approximation of human form. The people in that hospital will be terrified of me. They'll assume I'm some kind of weapon, some new horror unleashed by whatever faction they oppose. They'll flee, or attack, or try to document my presence for intelligence purposes. They will not see a lonely teenager trying to save a dying child. They will see an alien nightmare that materialized from thin air. But Subject Alpha doesn't have 31 minutes for me to overcome 4 years of social anxiety and species dysphoria. She has 31 minutes to live, and I am the only person in this reality with the resources to save her. Diagnostic complete, I say to the empty laboratory, my voice steady despite the dimensional fluctuations surging through my hybrid nervous system. I initiate first contact protocols. I step through Portal Array 7 and immediately realize I've made a terrible mistake. The sensory input from the Gaza hospital ward hits my consciousness with the force of a dimensional cascade failure. My enhanced senses, designed to process information from multiple realities simultaneously, are overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of human suffering concentrated in this single location. Every surface is covered in dust that contains trace DNA from hundreds of different individuals, people who were here before the building was partially destroyed, people who have since died, people who are dying now. My molecular analyzers detect elevated stress hormones in the air, the chemical signatures of fear and desperation and grief processed by thousands of human endocrine systems. But worst of all is the sound.
My auditory processors, calibrated to detect quantum fluctuations across 17-dimensional planes, are suddenly exposed to the acoustic environment of a collapsed civilization. The low, constant murmur of people in pain, the mechanical wheeze of improvised medical equipment running on backup power, the structural groaning of damaged buildings settling under their own weight. And underneath it all, the sound that will haunt whatever remains of my organic consciousness for the rest of my existence. The whispered prayers of children who are old enough to understand that they're dying. I stand frozen in the doorway of Ward 7, my synthetic system cycling through emergency stabilization protocols while the organic remnants of my brain attempt to process sensory input beyond anything I experienced during my 4 years of isolation. The smell, taste, texture of human misery. The visual complexity of medical improvisation using materials never intended for healthcare. The electromagnetic signatures of people's terror as they notice my presence. Because they have noticed me. Every person in the ward, children, medical staff, volunteers, has gone silent and is staring at the creature that just stepped out of thin air, wearing a form that resembles a human teenager built from liquid starlight and crystallized mathematics. Subject Alpha lies motionless in her cardboard crib, 27 feet from my current position. Her biological countdown continues. 28 minutes until septic shock. 28 minutes to save a life while surrounded by people who think I might be here to end theirs. A young doctor approaches me slowly, his hands raised in the universal gesture of non-aggression. He's speaking in Arabic, but my dimensional processors translate in real time. Please, we have children here. Whatever you are, whoever sent you, please don't hurt the children. He thinks I'm a weapon, a drone, a military asset deployed by one side or another in their endless war. He has no idea that I'm just a scared, lonely teenager who has never been this close to another human being in 4 years. I'm here to help, I say, my voice emerging peculiarly modulated by quantum harmonics infused with subsonic frequencies that cause the air around me to shimmer with visible distortions. Realizing the linguistic barrier, I quickly pull up a translation routine tailored to the Palestinian dialect of this region, ensuring my message is understood as clearly as intended. I sound like a machine pretending to be human, which I suppose is exactly what I am. The doctor takes another step backward, his fear spiking to levels my sensors can detect as electromagnetic field fluctuations around his nervous system. Everyone in the ward is now pressed against the far walls, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the nightmare that just invaded their refuge. Subject Alpha has 27 minutes left to live, and I'm terrifying the only people who might be able to help me save her. This was a mistake. This was always going to be a mistake. But I'm here now, and running away won't undo the last 4 years of cowardice. The infant, the baby in bed 23, she's septic. She needs immediate antibiotic intervention or she'll be dead in 26 minutes. The doctor stares at me with the expression of someone trying to process information that doesn't fit any existing category in his worldview. Behind him, a nurse is quietly ushering children toward the exit, preparing for evacuation. How do you know that? He asks. I think because I have quantum processors that can analyze biological systems at the molecular level. Because I've been watching your hospital through dimensional viewing technology for the past 8 hours. Because I replaced most of my humanity with mathematics and physics, but apparently not the parts that refuse to let children die. But ultimately, I'm a doctor, is the lie I go with. I specialize in pediatric emergency medicine. It's not entirely false. My hybrid consciousness contains the complete medical knowledge of simulated data of millions of hours doing countless medical procedures, including treatment protocols for diseases that don't exist in this reality. I know more about healing than any human physician who ever lived. I just don't know how to interact with the people I'm trying to heal. The doctor glances at Subject Alpha, then back at me, weighing the impossibility of my appearance against his desperate need for medical expertise. We don't have antibiotics. We haven't had proper medication in weeks. I do, I say, and begin the process of synthesizing pharmaceuticals using matter-state conversion from Dimension 9. This is the moment everything changes. The moment I stop being a reclusive coward and become something else entirely. I'm just not sure what that something is yet.
Chapter 5. The Art of Healing. My skeleton reconfigures into manufacturing mode, and I extend my right hand toward the empty space beside Subject Alpha's cardboard crib. Microscopic portal generators embedded in my synthetic skin tear open rifts to Dimension 9, where matter exists in a state of pure potential, waiting to be reshaped according to conscious intent. The air shimmers as I begin the synthesis process. Molecular structures materialize from quantum foam, first the basic carbon-hydrogen framework, then the complex antibiotic compounds that don't exist in this reality's pharmaceutical databases. Ceftriaxone, synthesized from scratch using atomic manipulation techniques that would require a laboratory the size of a city block in conventional physics. Vancomycin, assembled molecule by molecule from raw elements harvested across dimensional boundaries. The medications appear as perfectly formed vials of crystalline liquid, materializing in defiance of thermodynamics, conservation of mass, and every law of chemistry ever discovered by human science. They hover in the air for 2.7 seconds before settling gently onto the makeshift medical cart beside the doctor. Every person in the ward stares at the impossible pharmaceutical manifestation with expressions ranging from terror to religious awe. Several children begin whispering prayers in Arabic. A nurse crosses herself. The doctor reaches toward the vials with trembling hands, then stops, looking back at me with eyes that have gone very wide. "What are you?" he asks in English, his voice barely above a whisper. The question I've been dreading. The question I don't have an answer for that wouldn't sound like science fiction or psychotic delusion. The question that forces me to confront what I've become. I'm someone who doesn't want children to die, which is true even if it's not an explanation. The ceftriaxone should be administered intravenously at 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. The vancomycin is for backup if she develops resistance. Standard pediatric protocols apply. The doctor examines the medications with the desperate intensity of someone who has watched too many patients die from treatable conditions. My quantum processors detect elevated dopamine and norepinephrine in his neurochemistry, the neurochemical signature of hope battling against learned helplessness. Am I having a mental break? He asks as he reaches out to me, trying to wave away the delusion. His hand meets my body and I don't dissolve as he expects. How? I think to myself, because I rebuilt myself using materials from realities where consciousness can directly manipulate matter. Because I've spent 4 years learning to play God with physics while hiding from human contact. Because I'm not entirely human anymore, and the parts of me that aren't human can do things that violate every natural law this dimension acknowledges. Advanced synthesis techniques, I say.
May I examine the patient? The doctor dazedly nods, stepping aside as I approach Subject Alpha's makeshift crib. This close, my enhanced senses provide detailed biological analysis that makes her condition even more heartbreaking. She weighs 4.2 kilograms, roughly half what a healthy 6-month-old should weigh. Her core body temperature is 97.1 degrees Fahrenheit, indicating the early stages of hypothermic shock. The infection in her left arm has spread to her lymphatic system, and I can detect the molecular signatures of gram-positive bacteria in her bloodstream. She's dying in slow motion, and she's aware enough to know it. But as I extend my hand toward her, something unprecedented happens. My allotropic skeleton, calibrated for combat and dimensional manipulation, suddenly reconfigures into patterns I didn't consciously design. The synthetic tissue of my palm becomes transparent, revealing the crystalline neural networks beneath, and warm light begins to emanate from the quantum processors embedded in my bones. Subject Alpha turns her head toward the light. Her eyes, those same hollow, abandoned eyes that triggered my emotional cascade, focus on my face with sudden clarity. And then, impossibly, she smiles. It's the first time another human being has looked at me without fear since my transformation. The first time someone has seen the monster I've become and responded with anything other than terror or revulsion. She reaches up with one tiny, malnourished hand and touches my synthetic cheek, and the contact creates visible ripples in the air around us as my dimensional field generators respond to her touch. Hello, I whisper. My voice automatically modulates to frequencies that human infants find soothing. She makes a soft sound, not quite a word, but close enough to register as attempted communication in my linguistic processors. Her vital signs stabilize as my presence somehow activates dormant healing responses in her immune system. The infection markers in my molecular analysis begin to decline even before the antibiotics are administered. How are you doing that? The doctor asks as he's monitoring her pulse with a makeshift stethoscope, staring at readouts that show improvement no medical science can explain. I'm not entirely sure myself. My quantum processors are detecting biological changes in subject alpha that seem to correlate with proximity to my dimensional field generators, but the mechanism is beyond my current understanding. It's as if her body is responding to energy patterns that exist outside conventional physics. Perhaps I'm learning to perform miracles, and I'm just calling it science. The doctor begins the antibiotic administration while I maintain contact with subject alpha, monitoring her biological responses through my enhanced senses. Around us, the other medical staff gradually overcome their fear and approach with other patients, children with injuries and conditions that conventional medicine can't address given their resource limitations. Within 30 minutes, I've synthesized enough medications to supply a full hospital pharmacy. Pain medications that don't exist in this reality's chemistry textbooks, antibiotics engineered at the molecular level to target specific bacterial strains, nutrition supplements that can reverse malnutrition in days rather than weeks. But more importantly, I've discovered something about myself I never expected. I'm good at this. Not just the technical aspects of healing, but the human interaction. When I focus on helping rather than hiding, when I channel my enhanced capabilities towards solving problems rather than avoiding them, something in my synthetic consciousness becomes more human, despite being less human in biological terms. Doctor, I say to the medical team leader as I finish treating the seventh child, I need to establish a more comprehensive treatment facility. This hospital doesn't have the infrastructure to handle the number of patients who need care. We're doing everything we can with what we have, he replies, exhaustion evident in his voice. But you're right. We need more space, more supplies, more personnel. We need a miracle. I look around the overcrowded ward, calculating space utilization and patient distribution patterns, and realize I might be able to provide exactly that. How would you feel about a hospital that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously? The question sounds insane even to me, but my quantum processors are already designing the architectural framework for a medical facility that would exist partially in this reality and partially in dimensional spaces where the laws of physics are more negotiable. A hospital where distance is variable, where resources are unlimited, where healing can occur at the speed of thought. A hospital that could revolutionize medicine for this entire region, or destroy everything if I make a single miscalculation. But looking at subject Alpha, who is now sleeping peacefully, her infection markers dropping, I realize I'm past the point of saying it's safe. I've already crossed the line from observer to participant, from coward to something else. Show me, the doctor says, and I know there's no going back. I'm about to change the world, whether I'm ready or not.
Chapter 6. The Architecture of Impossibility. Creating a multi-dimensional hospital while surrounded by people who barely understand conventional medicine presents certain logistical challenges. I can't simply tear open massive portals without causing panic, and I can't explain the theoretical framework behind dimensional architecture without sounding completely insane. So I start small. I need everyone to step back approximately 10 feet, I announced to the medical staff. What I'm about to do will look unusual, but it's perfectly safe. That's not entirely true. What I'm about to attempt has never been done before, and the failure scenarios include everything from local reality collapse to accidentally merging this dimension with dimension 15, where gravity flows backward and consciousness exists as a transmissible disease. But the children in this ward don't have time for extensive safety testing. I position myself in the center of Ward 7 and begin the process of expanding local spacetime. My allotropic skeleton reconfigures into architectural mode, extending crystalline support struts that phase partially out of normal reality. The osiotropic fluids in my circulatory system floods these structures with dimensional energy, creating a framework that exists simultaneously in this reality and in Dimension 3, where spatial relationships are more like guidelines than laws. The air begins to shimmer as I fold space around itself, creating pockets of expanded volume that appear as distortions in the hospital's geometry. From the outside, Ward 7 still looks like a damaged room in a partially destroyed building. But from the inside, the space is now roughly 4 times larger, with perfectly clean walls that seem to be made of crystallized light. "Dear God," whispers one of the nurses. Several medical staff members back away from the expanding dimensional anomaly, but the doctor, whose name I've learned is Dr. Kassem, approaches with the fascination of someone who has spent his career fighting the limitations of medicine. "The space is stable," I explain, as new medical equipment begins materializing from Dimension 9. The dimensional expansion is anchored to my neural field, so it will maintain structural integrity as long as I'm present. I can synthesize any medical equipment you need, create unlimited clean water, generate electrical power, and establish communication networks that can't be jammed or intercepted. Advanced surgical equipment appears throughout the expanded ward, devices that incorporate both conventional medical technology and dimensional enhancements that make them far more effective than anything produced by human engineering. Operating tables that can automatically adjust to optimize surgical outcomes, monitoring systems that can detect biological anomalies at the cellular level, anesthesia delivery systems that work by temporarily phasing nerve endings out of normal spacetime. But most importantly, I create something that this hospital has lacked for weeks: hope. "How many patients can this facility handle?" Dr. Qasim asks, examining an advanced diagnostic scanner that materialized beside one of the new examination areas. My quantum processors run capacity calculations based on dimensional volume, resource synthesis rates, and optimal patient flow patterns. Assuming standard triage protocols and proper staffing, approximately 400 simultaneous patients. More if we expand into additional dimensional layers. 400? Dr. Qasim stares at me with an expression I can't quite interpret.
We've been struggling to treat 40 patients with our current resources. You're talking about increasing our capacity by a factor of 10? More than that, I correct. I can synthesize specialized medications for conditions that don't have treatments in conventional medicine. I can perform surgical procedures using techniques that don't exist in your medical textbooks. I can establish direct neural interfaces that allow real-time monitoring of patient consciousness during critical procedures. I'm not boasting, just providing factual assessments of my capabilities. But I realize my words sound like the ravings of someone with a severe psychiatric condition. Fortunately, the evidence of what I can accomplish is literally surrounding us in the form of impossible architecture and miraculous medical equipment. Who are you? Dr. Qasim asks for the second time in an hour. What are you? The question that keeps coming back. The question I still don't have a good answer for. I'm Adrian Blackwood, an 18-year-old heir to a technology fortune who rebuilt himself using materials from alternate realities after a laboratory accident nearly killed him. I'm someone who spent 4 years hiding in a basement because human interaction terrified him more than quantum dimensional physics. I'm a creature that's no longer biologically human, but apparently still psychologically vulnerable to the sight of dying children my inner monologue thrums. I'm someone who is just now learning that all the power in the multiverse means nothing if you don't have the courage to use it for something beyond yourself. In the end, I'm a doctor, I say, which is becoming truer each time I say it. Over the next 6 hours, word spreads through Gaza's remaining population that something impossible is happening at the hospital. Families begin arriving with children who haven't eaten in weeks, with elderly relatives suffering from chronic conditions, with injuries that conventional medicine can't address given the current resource constraints. I treat them all. The process becomes a kind of meditation. Each patient presents a unique biological puzzle that my enhanced consciousness can solve using principles that span multiple realities. A child with severe burns receives synthetic skin grafts grown from materials that exist in a state of permanent cellular regeneration. An elderly man with kidney failure gets temporary mechanical organs that filter toxins using dimensional filtration processes. A pregnant woman whose baby is in distress receives monitors that can assess fetal health using quantum resonance imaging. But more than the technical aspects of healing, I'm discovering something about human interaction that I never learned during my 4 years of isolation. When you focus entirely on helping someone else, when you direct all your capabilities towards solving their problems rather than protecting yourself from their judgment, something profound happens to the social anxiety that drove me underground. It doesn't disappear. I still flinch when people look directly at my synthetic features, still feel overwhelmed by the electromagnetic signatures of human emotions, but it becomes manageable when filtered through the purpose of healing. I'm still terrified of human contact, but apparently I'm more terrified of letting people die when I have the power to save them. Dr. Qasim works beside me throughout the night, his initial fear gradually transforming into professional respect as he witnesses procedure after impossible procedure. Other medical staff adapt to the dimensional hospital's enhanced capabilities with the resilience of people who have already seen their world collapse and rebuild itself. By dawn, we've treated over 200 patients. The mortality rate, which had been climbing steadily for weeks, drops to nearly zero. Children who are hours from death are sitting up and eating synthesized nutrition supplements. Adults with chronic conditions are experiencing healing that should have taken months or years.
Chapter 7. Turning Point. Hope, it turns out, is a virus. It wasn't optimism, not really. More a feverish contortion of the human drive to persist. A thing that bred in the lungs like a pandemic and then spilled out wet-mouthed into the streets. Once the word got out, once the story of the miracle spread, there was no wall, portal, or force field strong enough to keep it from multiplying. Not even in Gaza. Not even now. Maybe especially not here, where every atom of air was already high-pitched with need. Within hours, the city began to converge on the hospital.
Entire blocks shuffled and lurched toward the rift in the world like iron filings dragged by the gravity of an invisible hand. Maimed, shrapnel-tocked children, bleeding mothers, grandfathers that barked commands even as they rolled forward in battered wheelchairs, men whose faces had been dented by war, and women whose voices refused to be made small by loss. Inside the hospital's expanded dimensional space, the air became permanently saturated with the smell of sweat, rotary meat, vaporized plastic, propulsive powder, and the faint ozone tang from my own synthetic metabolism. Outside, something like a siege took shape. The news spread faster than fire in oxygen-rich brush. According to the hospital's radio array, patched by me to sweep the full spectrum and filter out jamming, I counted 17 different sources reporting on the alien medical facility in the ruins of Gaza City. Some called it a Zionist trick, a propaganda hallucination, or an elaborate psyop. Most called it a miracle, and with the logic of starving people, decided it must be for them. But miracles, like viruses, are most dangerous in populations with no natural immunity. Adrian, Dr. Kassim said, bustling behind me with a triage board in hand, another 30 patients from the East Quarter, and they say they must come here now before it is too late. In the bed nearest us, a girl of maybe 11 years clutched her bandaged leg and stared at me with an expectation I couldn't parse. Her mother leaned over her, whispering, "Allah's will." "Please," a man shouted from the doorway, holding up a child with pustules covering his face. "Just touch him, just once." "My wife is outside," another voice called. "She can't walk anymore." I synthesized the necessary skin grafts for the girl, stopped the bleeding, eliminated all infection vectors down to the 5th decimal, but I could not repair her belief that the world had rules, and that the rules might be kind. The exponential growth of hope had, paradoxically, attracted exactly the response I'd always feared: overwhelming, mindless force. They pressed against the windows now, hundreds of palms smearing the glass, faces contorted with desperation. "Please," a woman whispered, "please, my baby." I spent the next hour expanding the hospital's dimensional architecture, but the more I branched the space, the more it drew attention. Everyone with an eye in orbit now knew there was something new in Gaza, something unexpected. The crowds outside the gates grew denser, forced there by rumors and the blunt impact of hope in a city that had run on scarcity for too long. Somewhere miles away, someone in a uniform made a decision, and a new kind of drone appeared above us. My sensors caught the signature instantly: depleted uranium casing, microkinetic warhead. I observed, watched the way the warhead oscillated as it spun, the drone operator in some faraway place looking for the best place to treat the anomaly, bringing hope to the people left in Gaza and neutralize it at any cost. Inside the hospital, hundreds of children slept, healed or healing, none of them aware of the dire threat looming. I could have run. There were 17 exit vectors that would have allowed me to phase out of existence altogether, to leave the world behind as easily as changing a channel. I had less than a second to assess, react, and improvise. My skin's defensive nanolayers were engineered to resist small arms fire, not the raw physics of a depleted uranium penetrator. No parameter in my neural nets had ever been trained for this, except perhaps the one that said protect life at whatever cost. I did not have time to build a new weapon or to interface with the hospital's dormant defensive systems. I had only time, and in that sliver-thin interval, I gave more of myself. A superheated pulse ran along my spine, and I felt my own bones unspool into lattices of ceramic and carbon, driven by some convulsive autonomic will. My right arm split itself open at the seam. At the last instant, I redirected every available joule of kinetic energy into a single explosive gesture, like a baseball pitcher winding up for the throw that would end the world. The hand reconfigured into an anti-drone device detached at the wrist. I launched it at the drone. My processors calculated the intercept trajectory. There was a non-zero chance of failure. If the projectile missed, the warhead would reduce nearly a third of the hospital to ash. If I missed,
So many of the children, the ones who had trusted me, who had begun to believe, against all reason, that the universe had not written them off, would be beyond even my help. It struck the drone at supersonic velocity, shattering the casing, disrupting the delivery vector, and, at a cost even my pain-dampening algorithms couldn't suppress, detonating the warhead at 150 meters above the roof. The world went white. I felt the shockwave in my marrow, a soundless howl that expanded into every cell. The blast burned the air, charred every exposed surface, vaporized my synthetic skin in a flash of blue-gray plasma. I did not register the collapse, not with my physical senses anyway, but my backup processors, buried deep in what was left of my chest, continued to process the aftermath as if nothing had happened. Across the hospital, windows imploded, shards embedded in the walls, the beds, the people. The energy of the blast knocked half the crowd unconscious and shattered most organic eardrums, but inside the dimensional pocket, the warhead's core failed to breach the boundary, and the children at Ground Zero survived, cradled by a geometry that refused to be erased. The hospital's intercom buzzed to life. Dr. Kassim's voice came through, shaken but alive. Adrian, there are survivors, the children, many, many children. I sent a simple confirmation. Then, pulling myself forward with the last of my organic will, I reconfigured my body one more time, flattening damaged tissue, rerouting broken circuits, sealing the most critical leaks. I would not hold together for long, but it would have to be enough. But the message had been sent. The children would not be allowed to dream in peace. The war outside the miracle was adapting, as it always did, to the threat of people surviving.
Chapter 8: The Intervention Protocol. I had underestimated the depths to which the Zionists were willing to sink, but this, the utter lack of compunction in unleashing violence on a hospital filled to the gills with children, chewed at my assumptions with a rabid, froth-lipped hunger. I had heard the rumors, of course. Every conflict breeds its own mythology of cruelty, tales of enemy units that butchered non-combatants, of chemical attacks on civilian infrastructure, of summary executions and mass graves. But something in me, perhaps a vestigial hope or a trace of arrogance, convinced itself that those stories were the currency of propaganda, hyperbolic by design and always traded at a discount. It was easier, cleaner to believe the worst things people did belonged to some other, more monstrous species, never to the species of the here and now opponent, and certainly never to the one I myself had, in some mute and shamed way, begun to resemble. I clung to the notion that some force, protocol, or decency, or at least a reciprocal fear of retribution, would stay the hand before the killing became wanton. I pictured a room full of desperate, disheveled commanders on the other end, bent over flickering tactical screens, arguing over justifications and imagined thresholds. Naive, I suppose. That was the word that repeated viciously in my head. Naive to think that war could be moderated, or that any limits we set for ourselves would be reciprocated. Naive to think that by playing nice I would somehow be less culpable, that refusing to become a monster would keep the monsters at bay. Perhaps at some earlier point I could have chosen differently, recalibrated my expectations, but it was too late to turn back time or dial down the escalation. The continuity of horror was a one-way ratchet, and I, by inertia or by complicity, was spun along with it. But I could make a choice now, and I would. I purged the last dregs of sentimentality, the delusion that the game's rules would protect even the smallest pawn. I would not give these children over to the logic of extermination. I would not, in the end, serve hope as a false narcotic. I would be the catalyst for a different equilibrium, one in which my particular brand of monstrosity outcompeted and ultimately neutralized theirs. I put the hospital into strict lockdown, folding space around the central wards until the children and staff were ghosted into a dimensional bubble where even the most sophisticated munitions would detonate against empty air. The microportals that vented sound and oxygen
rendered the place sepulchral and weirdly lightless, but they also made the shell unbreakable. I moved through the corridors in a body I barely recognized, half of my skin ablated to expose the tessellated, sunburst geometry beneath, every motion leaving behind a dust of liquefied ceramic and silver. I patched the staff, the patients, the panicking parents, but I did not stop to comfort them. All my spare cycles were allocated to the war. My processors drew in bandwidth from every stray RF signal in the Gaza envelope. Satellite uplinks, drone telemetry, the jittery microwave whispers of an IDF command network. I parsed it all, reconstituted their real deployment in a zooming, fractal map that wrapped around the hospital's spatial membrane. Blue blips for armor units, yellow for infantry, pulsing black for kill drones on loiter and intercept. I saw the pattern, and it was beautiful. An encircling web, tight as a noose, but every loop transmitted its own weaknesses. So much of war, I realized, was not about force, but about inertia. The pressure to make the next move, to avoid showing weakness, to escalate just enough to prompt the other side to overreact. I'd already forced their hand, and now they would be almost frantic to regain narrative control. A dramatic, public erasure, a demonstration that their loss of monopoly on violence was only temporary, that any anomaly would be annihilated before the world could make meaning out of it. I would have to violate my own protocols. No more interventions as elegant as a surgeon's suture. No more discreet miracles or plausible deniability. I would have to violate not just the rules, but the expectation that I even cared whether the rules applied. I opened a high bandwidth channel into the IDF's forward ops network by cracking their multi-layered encryption with quantum entangled side channels. In under a second, I harvested the Special Operations Directorate's override codes, ephemeral one-time tokens normally reserved for black bag raids, and replayed them back to their authentication servers. As their login walls folded, I injected a buried general withdrawal clause from the IDF's own operational guidelines, forcing every downstream command node to recognize only two valid orders: immediate retreat to a 10-kilometer perimeter and an unconditional ceasefire. Simultaneously, I disabled every internal comms channel except those carrying that sanitized withdrawal message. No sign signals, no reports, no corrections could get through. Using the commander's own voice print, a trivial impulse for my processors, I ordered an immediate stand down. His lieutenants, their digital provenance unchallenged, echoed back the retreat directive. Red blips on my tactical overlay pulsed and shrank, like hemorrhages sealing themselves. Within 90 seconds, the perimeter was slack. I watched the blue and yellow tags on my overlay peel back, grudging but obedient, dozens of vehicles and operators blinking out of my immediate threat radius. It would not last. Already, deeper nodes were noticing the anomaly and compiling countermeasures. One unit held, a platoon of drone engineers with direct hardlines, their base code insulated from even the most aggressive external reprogramming. They were rebuilding, prepping for another wave, but now with less coordination, less faith in their own chain of command. It was transactional, this contest of mind and machinery, a dance of overclocked willpower that briefly convinced me, against all evidence, that a pure intellect could solve anything as long as it was ruthless enough. But the reality was more pedestrian. Every action I took only multiplied the number of eyes trained on the hospital, and every reprieve bred a new, more creative attempt to dismember us from the world. My adversaries were learning in real time. They would not stall for long. I had to use the interval, however small, to build something that would outlast the fleeting blip of victory. Survival, as I understood it in my own mycelial circuitry, had to be more than just a sequence of clever escapes. The logic of hope demanded reproduction. The virus had to spread, to embed itself beyond the reach of any single extermination protocol. But first, I needed leverage. My overlays illuminated a new line of attack, the command vector behind today's escalation. Not the generals or the drone tacticians, they were algorithmically replaceable, their strategies as unthinking as mitosis. The pressure point was political, upstream from the machinery of violence,
a single, frail synapse that determined whether this gory standoff persisted for hours, years, or centuries. His name was Bibar Unith, and he was as much an algorithm as I was, if less honest about it. Prime Minister, Zionist poster boy, darling of the West, and, according to 17 different intelligence briefings and a handful of overfull biographical sketches, a man who only learned empathy by reading it as a list of weaknesses. His public face was impossible to crack, always smiling a slide rule smile, always invoking the memory of lost children to justify every step deeper into the abyss. But his true face was pure game theory, and it occurred to me, somewhat belatedly, that the only way to get his attention was to turn the rules of war into rules of personal risk.